Shop layout is hard, and everyone's circumstances are different, but by the end of this video, you'll have a set of techniques that you can use to get the absolute most of what you want out of your shop. There are a ton of things to think about, and trying to simultaneously solve 12 different problems without a good way to test things is a real challenge. But don't just start moving 500-pound tools around until it feels right. There's lots to be learned from thousands of years of people organizing spaces. Now, New York State is very clear about whether or not I'm allowed to call myself an architect, so to be clear, I am not an architect. However, I did go to architecture school, twice, as a matter of fact, and I've been involved in the design of buildings, both large and small, including this one. But, again, not an architect. But when it comes to laying out my shop, old habits die hard. So I'm going to go through some upcoming changes to my layout and give you 7 principles, one of which has like 8 sub-principles that will help you make the most of the space that you have. Here goes. Take a good look at what you've got and write it down. That means tools, furniture, available space, even the workflows and processes that you use the most. Measure all this stuff, like the tools and the furniture, and make concrete assumptions about the things that you want, like miter saw capacity or tool wall area. If you're a woodworker, you most likely have a table saw, maybe a bandsaw, a lathe. Do you produce large batches at once and you need a large surface to hold these things? Do you have the space for that surface to be dedicated to that task, or does it need to be multi-purpose? Maybe it needs to be semi-permanent, like a folding table. The best way to figure some of these things out is to put numbers to the items. For example, let's say that I decide that I need 15 square feet of table space to stack my parts while I'm building, and that just won't fit in the space that I have and still allow me to access my drill press. So I need the table to fold down, or maybe a flip-top table will let you double the space available for footprints. Being specific about your needs lets you identify what your bottlenecks are. You might have to make some decisions here, like what's the longest board that you're gonna wanna rip on your table saw. Just pick a number, 8 feet, 10 feet. It's not permanent and you can change it later, but it makes the design process move forward. The point is to be explicit about all these things. Architects don't make buildings, they make drawings of buildings. This is a quote from Robin Evans, and the point is that if your job is to organize space, drawings is the way to do it. Moving stuff around is slow and hard. I can't stress this enough. There are a lot of things that I can hold in my head, like a simple bookcase or a shop jig, but when it comes to laying out a space, drawing is like an extension of my brain. I can store information, I can make geometrical calculations, and put everything in front of me all at once. It's also a communication tool, whether the recipient of that communication is somebody else or just me in the future. Also, remember that a drawing isn't necessarily mean a piece of paper with pen and pencil on it. Like a CAD drawing is a drawing. A 3D model, whether that's digital or physical, is also a drawing. Even diagrams count as drawings if they help develop and convey some kind of geometrical idea. This diagram came to me about halfway through this design process, and it models the hub and spoke way that I think about using my space, because that's how I work. Acknowledging that that's the way I want it to be was kind of the key moment in the whole design that let me click everything into place. Normally, I do this sort of thing in plan, meaning like a top-down view of the space, like a floor plan. But there are some things that require vertical information too, like the arrangement of drawers in a cabinet, or if you have a lumber rack that's over top of a planer. But for this high-level organization of space, a plan is really the way to go. This helps me organize the tools, the furniture, the functions of the space, as well as giving me a place to check dimensions, like how wide is a walkway, and is this door swing gonna bump into something when it opens? So get a tape measure and record all the relevant dimensions: windows, doors, obstacles, outlets, whatever. anything that affects the design should go in there one way or another. Then you can build your space around it all. Hope you're enjoying it so far. There's a few more coming and they get really good. Take a second to like the channel and also like the video and subscribe to the channel. What tools do you use most? What tools do you use together most? My most used tool is a table saw by far, but the big assembly table is definitely the hub of my workflow because things come off the saw and onto the table before they go to the drill press or to the bandsaw or whatever's next. Ideally, all these things would be centered around a single pivot point so I could go from one to the next in like one step or two. That's what this diagram means to me. On the other hand, my planer tends to get used all by itself for a long time when I'm milling up wood for a project. I also have a separate room for computer work, electronics, and 3D printing stuff because those things are always pretty tightly coupled together. And in this new design, I'm setting aside about 130 square feet for metalworking, which is something I want to start doing more of. For the most part, the tools for metal and for wood are totally separate, with the main exception being the drill press. So one of my criteria is putting the drill press between those two spaces for wood and metal, so it's easy to get to from either area. But the tools aren't the only thing separating the metal and wood parts of the shop, which takes me to number 4. Where the stuff physically isn't the only way to think about arranging the space. There are loads of layers of things happening on top of that, like light or dust collection, or circulation, meaning like how people move through the space, where the walkways are and the doorways. I have 8 systems here that I think are worth touching on. This is particular to what I'm doing here, and yours might differ. I'll keep each one brief, but put these in a list somewhere and remember to think about each one as you design. System 1, fireproofing. Okay, this is a weird one to start with, but it was my segue into this section, so here we are. As far as the wood and metal areas are concerned, we have to think about the dust, sparks, and fire system that they share. The sparks and spatter from metalworking need to stay away from the sawdust from the wood. So keeping those things very separate is pretty important. And I want to have at least moderate separation between the two spaces, either half or full walls. System 2, air and natural light. In the winter, it's cold and the doors are closed. The only natural light in here comes from a set of windows here. And I thought about putting metalworking in this corner, but because I want that separated and kind of closed off, it would have meant cutting off basically all the natural light from the rest of the shop. So I ended up putting metal in the other leg of the L. That leg of the L has one of 2 big barn doors that I can open all the way up, and that's great for metalworking because I can open it up to do some grinding outside, or if I need ventilation, I can crack them a little bit or open them all the way up. System 3, work light. I could easily just cover the whole ceiling in LED shop lights, but I don't want to do that. I'd rather have more light where it's needed and chill out a little bit where it's not. The planer and sheet goods areas don't need a lot of detail work, so I'm happy to let it be a little darker over there. Differentiation is good for this kind of thing. So I'll be putting LED strips around the perimeter as fill, and I'll have more focused lights over the main work areas like the assembly table and the table saw. And then I'll have small work lights right at the tools like the drill press and the bandsaw. System 4, dust collection. The main machines that need dust collection are the table saw, the miter saw, and the bandsaw. My planer has an ejection fan, so I'm gonna build a stand with a built-in place for chips there. I think I'll be better served putting a dedicated shop vac under the miter saw than trying to stretch my Harbor Freight collector across the whole space. It's definitely cheaper than upgrading my whole system, and it saves a lot of duct work. System 5, circulation. This is really pivotal, and it's really the primary thing I'm worried about when I'm arranging the space. Where will I be? How will I move between stations and tools? I want to have a hub in the shop that has a really well-defined center, and everything that I use regularly is a spoke off of the hub of that wheel. My spokes are assembly table, table saw, bandsaw, drill press, and miter saw. System 6, electric. This is pretty solvable with extension cords, but it's important to think about which tools are on what circuits, especially if you have limited current. Putting a table saw and its dust collector on the same breaker is going to make your life bad, so take a minute to think about it in advance. Take note of what circuits you have and where their outlets are. System 7, video. I film my stuff, so having enough space between items to put a camera on a tripod and some lights is totally essential. Not only that, but moving those things around is kind of clumsy, so doing whatever I can to keep the gear in its own circulation system is important to keep me moving quickly as I work. System 8, material cycles. I left this one for last because it's my favorite, and I think it's way underappreciated. What I'm talking about here is material storage, garbage, dust, brooms, scrap material. Dust collection is one kind of well-controlled part of the system, but it also includes garbage cans, scrap collection and storage, spray containment, grease and oil management. The list goes on. Thinking about these things ahead of time makes the difference between a clean shop and a messy one, because if you bake waste control into how you think about the space, you'll make it easy and you'll do it. If you don't have a garbage can or scrap collection area near your miter saw, you are going to have a bunch of offcuts next to your miter saw all the time. Think about what happens to the other piece after you cut the part you want off, and you'll create a way to deal with it, whether that piece is scrap or if it's still usable and it goes back into the materials. Address the problem at its source. I know I like to have a variety of materials on hand, and that's great, but it's not great to keep them piled up in a corner somewhere. So designing areas for material storage, whether that's scrap or new, is really important. Luckily, it's something that you can usually jam into the leftover spaces after everything else is in there, like above your cabinets or under your CNC machine. Okay, those are the 8 systems. Now back to the bigger ideas. Woodworking tools in particular tend to have the size of the tool itself and then the required area around it for its operation. In-feed, out-feed, dust collection. Make sure you've left space for these areas. And the tool is always there, but the space around it is reusable, so double or triple it up if you need to. We do this intuitively all the time, but putting a name to it and drawing it makes it something you can have control over and maximize the benefit of. Once you've figured out how everything should be, don't be afraid to make it so. I need a single unit that's going to be a miter saw station, scrap and garbage collection, a tool wall, a room divider between the metal and wood areas. The only way to make that work is to design and build the thing. Otherwise, it will eternally be a half-baked compromise that drives me nuts. A big expansive space is so enchanting at first, it seems like endless possibility. But this is a trick. Walls are amazing, not in some metaphorical way because they give you constraints and force you to be creative and work with what you have, but because you can hang stuff on them. Tool holders, hardware caddies, push sticks, saw blades, everything. And that stuff is highly visible and within reach as long as the wall is near you. And that's the thing. Big spaces have walls that are far away, which sounds kind of stupid when I say it, but all your visible hanging opportunities are across the room. Think of your workspace as like a single pivot point and crowd as much stuff as you can right around that point to maximize what's in arm's reach. That's what keeps things efficient. Clamps, planes, measuring and marking. There are probably a few dozen tools that are my starting lineup of quick grabs. Some of these, like a pencil, are just all over the place. But others, like a drill, I want right next to the assembly table, barely a step away, if that. This is how you get the most out of every space, big or small. I know that I have a lot of space, so it's easy for me to say, but as you lay things out, think about what the next few items you're gonna come by might be, especially if they're big, like a CNC, or they have specific needs, like venting out a laser cutter. Where might that thing go? Are you limiting your options to the size of your CNC? That's okay if you are, but acknowledge it. Don't trade a good plan now for what might happen later, but do think about it a little. I've designed and redesigned this shop and my old shop several times at this point, and I know what the things are that work for me. Figure your own parameters out. What's most important and focus on that. I hope these tools help you figure out what's going to bring you minimum waste and maximum joy. Thanks for watching. I'll see you next time.